But I think the biggest thing is to think about how your event fits into your larger fundraising strategy. It is a single moment in time. It's a very special moment in time. It's a really important moment in time, but it's not your whole fundraising strategy. You have your individual, your corporate, your foundation, your communications. There's all those pieces working together. And there's, again, the journey that your supporters are on throughout the entire year, throughout their entire time with your organization. And the event is there to enhance that, whether it's a fundraising event or whether it's, a feel-good community event to introduce new supporters to your mission. That is part of the strategy and can't live by itself on one side.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joshua Hoffman and joined by my co-host Alex Gerashenko. And today we're talking with Amanda Nover, founder and consultant at Amanda Nover Event Strategies, which helps nonprofits rethink and elevate their fundraising events. And her firm blends event planning with deep nonprofit experience to help organizations reimagine what's possible and turn events into a key part of their donor journey. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
And so before we get into your work, I typically like to start with something kind of on the personal side. And last time we spoke, you mentioned taking a year-long trip with your husband that began right before, I guess you could call it, like the world shut down.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that trip? What inspired it? How did you end up, how did that end up shaping the next chapter of your life?
Yeah, sure. So, and thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here talking with you guys today. So our road trip, it was awesome. The timing turned out to be really crazy. So about a year before COVID, my husband Alex and I, we were like, you know what? Before we settle down, have babies, we want to do something really awesome. It was actually my husband's idea that he really had to sell me on, but I started to believe in it pretty quickly, and we decided there's so many areas of the United States that we're probably never going to get to see. So let's just go on a road trip. Let's leave our jobs. Both of us were kind of like ready to move on. We didn't love our apartment that much. We gave up our lease, or we planned to give up our lease. And we said we're going to spend a year on the road, driving from place to place, staying in Airbnbs, going to national parks, just seeing all the cool places that our country has to offer. And so the road trip was planned. The start date was March 1st, 2020. So we we put all our stuff in storage, we quit our jobs as planned, and headed out on the road. And there was this COVID thing happening, and we were like, whatever, it'll blow over. Clearly, it did not blow over. About 2 weeks into the trip, we were like, we can't travel anymore. So we stayed with my husband's parents for about 3 months before we did finally head out on the road in June 2020, and did end up traveling. We saw some amazing places. We drove kind of the entire perimeter of the United States over the course of about 9 months, and it was amazing. We didn't get to do every single thing we planned on. We wanted to, go to concerts and meet people, and we kind of didn't get to do all of that, but it was still amazing. And we saw places, like I said, that we probably never would have seen any other way. I mean, South Dakota and Montana and the Southwest, places that here in the Northeast are just kind of far and not an everyday experience. So it was amazing. My favorite place was Montana, and I can't wait to go back.
I was going to ask what the best place. I love Montana. It's what convinced me to move out west. You can't mention the word concert without me at least like asking a little question in there. And I know you didn't end up seeing that many concerts, but like, what is your genre? What concerts did
Oh,
you
we
wish you
were the
see?
most excited to see a country artist that my husband and I both love named Cam, and she was going to be at the Ryman in Nashville. And so we sort of planned out the whole first leg of
No.
our trip to be in Nashville to see her, and then that was canceled. And so we did not get to go, but we have seen her twice since then. So it all turned out okay.
That's nice. I would love to see a concert in Nashville. I feel like that's just like one of the music hubs.
Right. And at the Ryman, that would be so cool. But
Yeah.
it's okay. We still got to see her eventually.
No, that was great. I'm glad you shared all that. And I guess before we talk, and get into your business, I love to get, I guess, your take on kind of the nonprofit landscape right now. So things have obviously been really unpredictable lately, right? Economically, politically, socially, all that kind of stuff. And from your perspective, what's really going on in the nonprofit world today, and how are organizations kind of adapting?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you said, times are crazy. Things are really, really uncertain for nonprofits. There's a lot of organizations that have already lost funding, both government and foundation funding and individual corporate funding. Really, every stream of funding organizations have already lost. And then there's also just the looming uncertainty of what's going to happen, in the coming months and really years. And so, honestly, I have not seen an organization yet say, like, "We have a solid plan." I think everyone is just kind of waiting to see what happens, doing the best they can, and taking it day by day because a lot of the organizations I work with are direct service organizations helping people with a variety of challenges who really need the help, and especially now with everything going on, in our government, aren't getting it any other way, and so I think organizations are just taking it one day at a time, continuing to plow ahead, expanding where they can, because, again, the onslaught, from folks not able to get the same government assistance that they have been. Um, but yeah, it's scary out there for nonprofits right now, and that's hard for me to watch and hard for me because that's where I've spent my whole career. But I think nonprofits are very resilient and very resourceful and will figure out a way to meet the needs for as long as they can. So that's what I'm seeing.
Have you seen nonprofits do something to prepare for the unknown? Like, are there any
Yeah.
major steps that they're taking? Obviously,
For
that can
sure,
go.
yeah. I've heard of many conversations that are happening among leadership, among boards for how can we scale back programs? How can we adjust programs to make them, able to sustain themselves with, lower funding dollars, but also sometimes bigger conversations with what does it look like if we need to merge with another organization? Either, we're in a bad place and we need to find someone to take us on, or another organization wants to come to us, or of course, the especially uncertain, especially unfortunate possibility is closing your doors. And those conversations are happening. There are nonprofits that have already closed their doors since, things started happening at the start of the year. And so again, I don't know if there's any organization out there that has a super solid plan, just because no one knows what's going to happen. But I think the contingency planning is definitely something that's happening and taking up a lot of brain power and manpower for these organizations, which is also unfortunate because of how much more they have to do.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of want to go back. You mentioned like a lot of nonprofits are scaling back, and obviously events can be a larger, budgeted item. So,
Mhm,
why do you think, especially right now, but also in general, in person, connections and events matter so much right now?
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think events are often the first thing to go because it's a really expensive way to raise money, a really expensive way to raise visibility. However, what I, of course, am encouraging my clients and the organizations that I talk with is don't let them go if you can, because especially now, and especially when, people are not feeling so great about the world and their lives, we need opportunities for connection with each other and opportunities to share our organization's mission directly with the people who can support us. So I think there's been a trend to cut events for a while now, really since COVID. But at the same time, there's, I think especially in the last year or two, a lot of people are saying events are back, because life has pretty much resumed as it was before. So I don't know if I'm answering your question very well. I think there's a mix, but what my advice to every organization is keep those in-person opportunities to really personally make that connection with your donors, with your supporters, with your clients, with your volunteers, because there's really no substitute for that.
No, that was perfect. And I guess speaking of your advice, now let's kind of get into Amanda Nover event strategies.
Mhm.
And before we talk about like specifically what you do, I guess I'm curious what made you start your own firm in the first place, right? Like, did you
Mhm.
see a gap, or what gap did you kind of see in the market that essentially pushed you to building the firm?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's definitely a gap in the market. And the gap is this: there's a lot of fundraising consultants out there, and a lot of them don't want to do events work for a variety of reasons. And I get that because events are their own beast and they're a lot of work, and they're a lot of work that doesn't always directly impact fundraising. So I can see why a lot of fundraising consultants say, I'm going to leave that to someone else. Meanwhile, there's a lot of event planners out there and events consultants out there who don't necessarily know the first thing about fundraising or know anything about how nonprofits run, how boards work, how event committees work. And so my background is in events in mostly small nonprofits. And being in small nonprofits, you kind of have to do it all. I've done individual, I've done corporate, I've done foundations, I've worked with boards. So I really understand both the event planning piece and also the nonprofit fundraising and operations piece. And there's not that many consultants out there who do both of those things together. And I think that's really needed for nonprofits when you're trying to plan events that really move the needle, that really do what you need them to do. And so that was why I decided to start this business.
I'm gonna double click on that and kind of go one level deeper.
Mhm.
What specifically, as far as you want to explain, like what specifically do you do when first meet a prospect, when you sign,
Mhm.
what are the kind of the first steps that you take towards,
Mhm.
understanding what event they want to run and how to help that?
Yeah, sure. So I think really the organizations that find themselves looking for a consultant like me have one of a few problems. One is they want to do an event, but they don't know what they want to do, and so they need a little support from the beginning in figuring out what kind of event makes sense for our organization, what's going to make sense for our staff, what can we manage, and what should our goals be. And so that's one kind of project that I work on, is sort of from the beginning, the imagining of the event all the way through planning it and executing it. And then there's other organizations that have events that have done this event before, but for some reason there's a problem with it. Something's not working. They're not raising as much money as they want, or maybe their staff is miserable, or maybe, their board is calling for changes. And so they need a little extra support in really asking those questions that are going to get to the root of what's going on with this event that's making it not successful, or not achieving all the aims that you want it to achieve. And so typically when I start working with an organization, I'll just get the lay of the land. So hear from the staff, hear from leadership, hear from board members, and really pour into the numbers of the event to understand what's working, what's not, and what needs to change. And so from that point on, it's a little different in how organizations are wanting to engage with consultants in their fundraising work and in their events. But sometimes it looks like a sort of a thought partnership situation with the existing staff that are working on planning the event. Or sometimes it's I can do everything from finding a venue to all the way to executing the event. So it's fun in that way because, I get to do lots of different things. But that's sort of a quick overview on how it gets started.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
It was really interesting as you were mentioning the gap in the market, especially with event planners, event consultants, people who know how to put on a great event, but don't have the experience with nonprofit organizations.
Mhm.
And I think when we had met previously, you talked about what's the goal of an event. And I know that that seems like a simple question, but it dives much deeper. So I'd like if you could explain that to us and how that really puts you in a completely different mindset
Mhm.
and structure than other event planners as they approach nonprofits.
Yeah, this is the most important question, and the question that you need to ask before you make any decisions about what your event is going to be, what you're going to do, who's going to be there. It's what's the goal of the event? Because there are everyone just thinks, oh, fundraising, that's obviously the goal. And raising money usually is often the goal for nonprofit events, but it's definitely not the only valid goal, definitely not the only important goal that you should be thinking of when you're talking about events. For example, there's organizations who have maybe an older donor population who have been committed for years, who love the organization, but they're not getting new donors in the door. They might have an event where the goal is not necessarily raising money, but building their list, finding new supporters to kind of build the base of future supporters for the organization. Or, one kind of event I love to plan is sort of a cultivation event, is like a jargony term in the fundraising world, but something that's used to bring your donors or supporters closer to your mission. So maybe they're already giving, maybe they're not, but something that's going to help them learn more about your organization, introduce them to the staff, introduce them to the clients, the leadership, to take them from sort of a tangential relationship with your organization to a much closer relationship, so that later, when you do ask for more money, or money for the first time, they'll already be, that much more emotionally tied to your organization. And so these kinds of events look really different. Like, people are often wanting to do a 5K. 5K is a super fun event. It's really hard to use a 5K to make a lot of money because they're very expensive to do. It's lots of tiny donations as opposed to big donations, often other than sometimes sponsorships. But it's a great way to build your list because you have tons of people coming in who, heard about a great family 5K to run and walk with your kids. Or they just wanted to get out and do something. That's a great way to bring those new emails onto your list so that they can then enter that cycle of cultivation. Whereas something like a gala is a little bit different in that it's often an easier way to raise money as opposed to something like a 5K. Or a cultivation event, like I mentioned, where you're not there to raise money at all. Maybe you have a reception at your headquarters where people can take a tour and see sort of your mission in action, and experience that firsthand. That's not going to be, the type of event where you're going to build your list. So, again, that's really the first thing you need to decide on before you say, who are we going to invite? What are we going to do? What are we going to eat? What music are we going to play? All that needs to come after you figure out what your goal really is.
I guess on the other side of that coin, like, where do you see most organizations, I guess, get stuck when it comes to using events effectively, right? Is it like strategy, follow-up? Is it something else?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely lots of points where organizations get stuck, but I think the biggest one is really that follow-up piece that you just mentioned, because events are really part of an overall fundraising strategy, as opposed to, a grand finale. A lot of people say, like, oh, we work all year to have this great gala. People love it. But then sometimes the people who are there don't hear from you again until you're hosting that event again the next year. That's fine. Maybe they love your event and they come every year, but is that bringing them closer to your mission at all? Is that deepening the relationship at all? Not really. So I think what a lot of organizations need to do is not just say what's going to happen at this event, but what's going to happen after this event. What is that follow up going to look like? Where are they on their journey with our organization, and where do we want them to be? And once you say where we want them to be, and that may be different for different attendees, once you say where you want them to be, how are we going to get them there? And not just forget about them until the next year, but really think about what that journey looks like.
And maybe you answered this just in that response or in a previous response, but why do you think some nonprofit events, like work wallers might fall
Mhm.
flat?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the follow-up piece is really big, in that maybe the event didn't necessarily fall flat, but, the overall, I guess, result wasn't what you wanted long term. But I think a lot of times, number one, the goal thing that we talked about, if you're planning an event that's not really aligned with what you want and need to do, that's a big problem. I think people is a big piece, like the staff that you have supporting the event, the
Mm,
volunteers that you may have supporting the event. If they're not prepared to plan and execute that kind of event, um, that's a major hang up for organizations. Sometimes that's because that person doesn't have enough experience. Sometimes it's because that person has way too many other things going on to be planning an event. I see very often organizations that, have a staff member, maybe a director of development who has a million things on their plate, and then the organization is like, "And now you have to plan this event on top of that." And that's a huge distraction for them. So I always tell organizations to think about the opportunity cost of planning an event. Um, you know, the person who's planning the event or the people, when they're working on this, what are they not going to be doing? So I think that ends up being a big pain point because people are pulled into planning events who really don't have time to do it. And then I would say the final, like, really big problem I see with events is some events like a 5K, you can expect to kind of go, have a great time, and walk away maybe not knowing that much about the organization, and that's okay sometimes for that sort of event. But for other kinds of events, you really need to focus on how you're communicating your mission at many, many points throughout the event because you want people to not just have a great time, but be inspired, feel motivated to give, feel motivated to engage more deeply. And there's a lot of organizations who get really hung up on the logistics of the event and the food and the decor and that stuff that's really fun. But ultimately, what you need to be thinking about is what's the story that you're telling at your event and how are you communicating that with the people who are there? And ultimately, then how are you following up on that after? So I think those are three big ones, three big roadblocks that prevent organizations from having events that are, the best that they can be.
Mhm. I wanna, yeah, double click into the planning process 'cause, um, some of these events, especially a gala or even a 5K, takes a lot of
Mhm.
orchestration to get there, and also properly mapping your cash flow or how you're going to finance that.
Mhm.
Um, so on those lines of planning, how do nonprofits typically plan for events on the financial side? Is it something that they have to usually pay for upfront with the hope of getting enough in donations or getting enough in proceeds from the event? Or are there other options that you've seen for them to do it in a more sustainable way?
Yeah, great question, and this is something that organizations really struggle with, and I think the key here is getting ahead of it. There are many organizations that decide really at the last minute to plan an event, and there's some events that you can pull together at the last minute, and they're not super expensive or involved. Fine, but if you wanna have a big event, you need to be thinking more than a year ahead of time about what you're gonna do and what you're gonna need. Because if you have a number before you start thinking through what kind of event you're going to do, who's going to be there, and all the different elements and the vendors, you're going to often find yourself in a situation where you don't have enough money to do the things that you need to do. And so it's hard to plan that far ahead, especially in today's uncertain times. But organizations really need to start before the budget is set for the next year to decide generally. You don't need to decide on every single thing, but decide generally what you want to do and what you're going to need and who you're going to need to pay to do that so you don't get yourself into a situation where you're scrambling or where you have to cut corners because that's just going to set you up for stress and for, not being able to do the things you need to do. And so I really encourage organizations to start that conversation, come up with your goal, decide who you're going to invite, get some of those big pieces where it's going to be, get some quotes ahead of time, even if you don't commit to it, to a venue or to a caterer or whatever it is, get a good sense of what it's going to cost you before you set your budget. So, I know that's not super in the financial weeds, but that's the biggest advice that I would give
No,
anybody
that's great.
setting out to plan an event.
And all organizations need to plan a year ahead so that they have their annual plan and budget in place. Does the annual gala usually, or whatever that event is, play a role in that type of planning? You mentioned it needs to ideally happen a year out. How does that usually fit into their plans for their budgets as they approach next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think typically organizations will have, their a line for the gala in the budget, within the development or fundraising budget, dedicated to just the event because it is such a large cost, honestly, and they, wanna pull it out from everything else that you're doing administration wise. So yeah, I think again, coming up with a solid picture of what that number may be, plus building in a little extra, and then really having it on your budget as its own line. And then the staff member or members that are tasked with planning that event can really use that as their guiding stars. They're making decisions. I mean, when I plan a budget for an event, I really have everything broken out, almost every single cost. Like I think my venue is going to be X dollars, make sure that amount is in the budget. I think my caterer is going to be this, my auctioneer is going to be this. And that's hard if you're starting something from scratch. It's hard. But again, getting proposals way in advance before you even need to make a commitment is something that will help you get that picture.
And how about on the communication side as well? Like starting the planning process early, making sure that they're communicating to the right people to get them ready for the event or whatever the event is around, and then the communication after.
Mhm.
Is that something that you typically help them understand at a strategic level, at an
Mhm.
implementation level? Like, kind of where do you start and how deep does it go?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think probably the organizations that are the most successful with their communications and probably the least stressed are the ones that really plan ahead and map out what their communications calendar is going to look like for, I mean, the year, but month by month, or sometimes for some organizations, week by week. But to really build the event into that strategy. So, like, this week, the focus of our email is going to be X. This week, it's going to be X, and to make sure the event is woven into that in a way that's not totally taking over the overall organization communication, but still, enough to get the attention of supporters. And so, yes, I definitely help organizations both with the larger external communications piece, but also again that one-on-one, not just follow-up, which we talked about, but, pre-event one-on-one communication is really important, and so that's something I'm always pushing with organizations is that you can send out as many, blasts as you want, but sometimes the thing that's gonna get people to pay attention to your event or even your organization is an email from a friend or a board member or a staff member. And so I love to work with organizations where board members are, working to get folks in their network involved with the event or involved with the organization because that peer-to-peer personal connection piece is often what gets people in the door and not the millions of emails that you're planning. As wonderful as they may be, they can just get ignored. But when a friend is asking or a peer is asking, it's different. So, yes, on all levels, thinking about, how you're going to communicate externally, both on a macro level and one-on-one is so important and important to plan ahead, really.
You don't have to mention it by name unless you want to. I would like
Mhm.
you to, but what's the
Uh-huh.
best event that you've been a part of? And I guess, like, why was it so successful? And I can remind you the
Mhm.
second part of this question after, but, is there like a metric that you use that shows success other than just fundraising dollars?
Mhm. Yeah, sure. I think, probably the event that I talk about the most and that I think about the most was an event I planned for a organization I used to work for called Food and Friends in DC. They are a nonprofit that provides home delivered meals to people living with serious illnesses. There's chefs in a commercial kitchen on site at the office preparing meals with volunteers, and then individuals deliver them directly to people's doors, so they don't have to worry about how they're going to prepare food while they're battling cancer or whatever illness that may be. Anyway, they have an event every year that they've had for many years now called Chef's Best. And it is a chef tasting event. About 1,000 people attend. And they have about 30 to 50 local chefs and mixologists who come and do, little tastings. And so the event kicks off with a chef tasting, people mingling around, kind of cocktail hour, enjoying food, meeting the chefs and the different restaurants that are there. And then for the second half, people take their seats, they hear a program about the organization, and then there's a live auction. And what I loved about this event was that I think it was kind of the perfect blend of fun while also kind of taking care of the business of fundraising. You see a lot of chef tasting events out there that wouldn't have that fundraising piece. And then you see a lot of galas and auctions out there that wouldn't have that chef tasting piece. And so I loved that this event, even though it was difficult to plan, made both of those things come together, because I think that's really the recipe for a great event is fun while also educational, inspiring, and, leaving people with the desire to get involved and to give. So that's probably my favorite event that I've worked
That
on.
sounds like a really cool event.
It
Yeah.
is a cool event.
Were the chefs from all different restaurants, and were they
That's
able to, like, kind of promote that, like, "I'm at this restaurant," and did that help them as well?
Yeah, I think, the chefs were from all different restaurants around DC, and there was always, like, a chef chair, a particularly awesome chef that year who would then help to recruit some of their friends, and colleagues to come and be part of it. But yeah, I think it's a great look for, a chef or a restaurant to be at an event like this, especially because we all know before the pandemic and especially post-pandemic, it's tough out there for restaurants right now. And to be able to say, we're even giving back in this way is really cool for them. And I think they would enjoy, being around such an exciting energy at this event. And so yeah, it was super cool. And I got to know a lot of the chefs in the area when I worked on that event, which was a lot of fun.
And is there, again, other than, fundraising dollars, is there just a metric that you use to say, okay, this was a successful event?
Yeah, it's all part of that goal setting process that you wanna do at the
Mm.
beginning. If it's, "Do we wanna raise money?" It's, "Okay, write down on paper, how much money do we wanna raise? How are we gonna get to that goal?" I always make what I call a gift chart, and I say, "Okay, if I wanna raise $500,000, of that, 400's coming from sponsorships, 50,000's coming from tickets, this much is coming from the auction," so that you can literally check off, you know, these are the steps to get to my goal. But if the goal is something else, if it's building your list, it's how many new supporters do we want to get? How many names do we want to add to our list? How many new followers on social media do we want to get? So I encourage organizations to really figure out what those metrics are from the beginning so that you can track your progress to those goals both during the planning and after the event. But I also think it's important for organizations, and this is often forgotten, is to think about those like softer metrics that you can't really measure, but are there. Just like the guest experience. What did you hear from people as they were leaving the event? What did your board members say the day after the event? How did your staff feel? Were they miserable or did they enjoy themselves? Were they happy during the event planning process? And so I always take time after any event to do like a full debrief, looking at both the things you can measure and also the things that you can't that are very important too.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the qualitative and quantitative side. I think that was
That
really
that's a
important.
good that's a better word for it than whatever I've
No,
said.
no, I thought that was really good. Do you wanna spend a second talking about mission-driven consulting, or do you wanna keep this focused on your firm?
Yeah, sure. Mission Driven
Cool.
Consulting is a fundraising consulting firm that works with clients all over the country on all sorts of fundraising projects. My dear friend Hannah Zolman founded the firm now probably at least 10 years ago. And she is a fundraising powerhouse. Amazing. I encourage everyone to look her up. She's the founder of the firm, and I began working with her in 2020, working with organizations that have all sorts of fundraising challenges. Often they're very small fundraising shops with no fundraising staff or maybe one fundraising staff, and need some added capacity, need some strategic guidance. The firm does everything from executive coaching to, adding elbow grease, writing, content for emails, creating social media posts. So kind of a jack of all trades, firm, if you will.
How does that complement what you guys do?
Mhm. Yeah, so our firm does, again, all sorts of fundraising work. Our focus is not events, though. Sometimes our clients will have events that we will assist with, but it's not sort of our bread and butter. And that the fundraising events is what I've done for my whole career, what I've always wanted to do. And so I absolutely love working with mission driven consulting and still work with the firm, as I said, but wanted to do more in the event space. And like I said, I think someone like me has something a little different to offer, having the fundraising chops and also the event planning chops. And so I added this into how I'm spending my time, because I enjoy it.
And I guess my last question is, and this is kind of a wrap-up question, I guess, so feel free to kind of repeat and piece together things that you said or say something new, but
Mhm.
if you had to teach something to nonprofits, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I think the biggest thing is to think about how your event fits into your larger fundraising strategy. It is a single moment in time. It's a very special moment in time. It's a really important moment in time, but it's not your whole fundraising strategy. You have your individual, your corporate, your foundation, your communications, there's all those pieces working together, and there's again the journey that your supporters are on throughout the entire year, throughout their entire time with your organization, and the event is there to enhance that. Whether it's a fundraising event or whether it's a feel good community event to introduce new supporters to your mission, that is part of the strategy and can't live by itself on one side. So that's probably my biggest piece of advice.
No, that was perfect. And as we come up to the end of the episode, I just want to give you an opportunity to mention how people can find you and
Mhm.
anything else you'd like to end with.
Yeah, sure. You can find, my company, Amanda Nover Event Strategies, at amandanover.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Amanda Nover.
Awesome. And thank you so much for coming on the show. Amanda,
Sure.
this was so helpful. We haven't had someone specifically talk about events yet. So I thought you were the perfect person to bring on. And I thought you did a great job
Awesome.
of kind of explaining how you help nonprofits and what nonprofits should look at. So thank you so much.
It was
My
really interesting
pleasure.
to see. You were able to go deep in a very concise way, which was amazing. So
I'm
I can't
glad.
imagine the value that nonprofits will get as they really engage with you for events. So thank you for being a
I'm
part of the
so
show.
glad. Well, as you can see, I could talk about events all day, so I'm glad to spend this time with you guys and share some of what I love.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you guys.